Welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm Shannon Eliot. Today we'll be discussing mental health and the Asian and Asian American community. It's my great pleasure to have two distinguished guests with us today. To my immediate right is David Young, who is a licensed psychologist and behavioral health care specialist and program director for Community Health for Asian Americans, which is a nonprofit focusing on Asian American mental health in Oakland. He also oversees the Contra Costa County programs for CHA. He is also the president of Life Portal, which is a consulting organization to nonprofit organizations, the government agencies, and academic institutions. And to my far right is Jonathan Griggs, who is the rehab activity leader for Via Fairmont Mental Health Rehabilitation Center in San Leandro. He's also a member of the POCC Asian American Committee. He's also on the Social Inclusion Campaign Advisory Board for Alameda County and is the spokesperson for the National API Empowerment Network. So lots of things going on with our guests. Thank you both for being here today. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
My first question for both of you guys, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what your organization does that you represent.
Well, first of all, my job consists of doing rehab activities for Villa Fairmont in San Leandro. And what I do there is I counsel people, I supervise clients, I schedule and plan activities, outings, and overall just kind of oversee some of the work we do in the rehab department there as well, as far as taking care of facilitating groups and what have you and stuff like that. But my outside of work, outside of the job actually, is with another organization, with the Pool of Consumer Champions within Alameda County, and that's the Asian Committee with the Pool of Consumer Champions. And if I could, I'd like to first read off our mission statement with the mission of the Pool of Consumer Champions Asian American Committee meeting. The purpose is to collaborate with Alameda County Behavioral Health Care Services and other organizations in bringing hope, empowerment, recovery, and social inclusion to Asian Americans with mental health challenges and awareness of our diverse needs, strengths, and possibilities.
And Jonathan, I believe you mentioned you were a consumer peer advocate and a provider for more than 10 years. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay, great.
Yes.
Great.
So Community Health for Asian Americans, or otherwise known as CHA, provides mental health and substance abuse services focusing on the Asian Pacific Islander communities. So we have various programs. I run the Contra Costa County programs where we serve Asian families, mostly Southeast Asian, in 10 different languages. We also have youth development programs where we work with Asian youth as well as the other communities that are in the Contra Costa Richmond area.
So I'm interested both from the consumer perspective as well as the provider perspective, how mental health is perceived in the Asian American and Pacific Islander community.
The conceptualization of mental health in the Asian community is very different from culture to culture or different ethnic group to ethnic group, which makes working with Asians much more complex. So the first thing most people need to appreciate is the diversity of the Asian community. So when you say how is mental health viewed in the Asian community, it depends on which ethnic group, on levels of acculturation, how long they've been in the United States, how they think of health and illness. In kind of traditional means, Asians tend to think more holistically about how their health and well-being is working, so they wouldn't necessarily separate mind and body in that way. So even in a lot of the Asian languages, the terminology that's used for health, mental illness, dissatisfaction is different from how it is in sort of mainstream thinking about that. So many people would think of how they're doing in terms of their physical health and how they feel physically, not necessarily addressing emotion issues right away. So a lot depends on the person's level of acculturation and what terminology they would use for that.
But what are some common mental health problems in that community, and what might be some contributing factors to those mental health problems?
A lot of Asians have the same types of problems that you would see anywhere, especially in the United States. And then also when you look at natural disasters like what's happening in Japan, there are people that will be struggling with various events that happen in their lives, whether it be trauma that happened during war or trauma that happens as a result of being a refugee because of war or because of natural disasters. And even though there are different trends in terms of how an Asian community, Asian population might respond to those, you would see different types of disorders. The incidence of most major mental illnesses, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, is the same throughout the world. The difference is most Asians usually would not come in for services until the problems become very severe. So the question is a little less about the prevalence or incidence of serious mental illness or mental disorders as much as what are the various needs of that particular population. Also, the studies in working with Asians is tough to evaluate because people tend to group all Asians into just one category, and the Asian American, more acculturated population will tend to have different types of problems as people who might have, say, immigrated more recently, will have all those issues of being a refugee, so more post-traumatic distress and things like that.
I can speak as more coming from the Japanese American side of it. Again, I'm a Japanese American, Sansei, third generation, born here. My mom was born here as well, and her parents are from Japan. But a common thing amongst Japanese is that Japanese have this thing called gaman, which is that we don't let our true feelings known. And it's very hard to speak out and tell people how we're feeling. So it's a common problem. It's a big problem amongst other Asians as well, I see in my facility, because a lot of times we don't even invite them to the recovery conference and the treatment teams because that they will not speak, they won't tell you how they're doing. I think they might say, like, you see my shoulder hurts or something hurts or I'm not feeling well, but it's common that they will not come or say how they feel, even if you try to get them to come, and you have to do kind of like different things to kind of get them to come sometimes and provide little incentives there. But is it helpful? No, it's probably not too helpful, being that I have an American side of me too as well. My dad was a Caucasian actually, so I was able to kind of trust the system a little bit and be able to get therapy and group therapy and individual therapy and find out that by trusting the system, trusting a little bit, I was able to kind of like let people know how I was doing, how I was feeling, and but that's a common problem, and of course the stigma is a big problem too. I mean, people just, you know, will be so discriminated against and just won't go past that at all.
Sure.
Yeah.
I know the POCC Asian American Committee, it's a consumer-based group really. Are there any issues that are experienced more by the members in the POCC Asian American Committee? Are there some commonalities that find them, some common issues that they work together to overcome?
Yeah, we're trying to increase social inclusion now. We're trying to like get people to reconnect with their friends a little bit, and the POCC Asian Committee does that by having committee work where people can group together and reconnect on activities, meetings, campaigns to bring awareness to the community, bring awareness to Asian American needs, bring awareness to their experiences. Our experiences are different. Let us look at our strengths instead of our weaknesses, our abilities instead of our disabilities, all of our assets that we have. So a lot of the work is coming together and just having that peer support component and being able just to talk amongst each other and work out issues.
I'd like to pick up on that issue that Jonathan mentioned in terms of stigma, because I think, number one, having kind of varied or a little bit different conceptualization of health and mental health issues and not necessarily segregating those as we might do in Western culture is one sort of obstacle or barrier in terms of how we speak about or how we go about developing programs or treatment programs for Asians. Another obvious, very major barrier or issue is the stigma. Some of that stigma comes from different understandings of health and mental health, but other comes from that sense of shame, that sense of the gamen, or in Japanese culture and most of the cultures that tending to want to sort of handle things within oneself or within one's own family. So to share pretty intimate details, especially negative details about one's life, isn't very culturally sanctioned. And because that doesn't reflect just on you as a person, it reflects on your entire family. So especially if you are struggling with depression, you're struggling with an anxiety disorder that inhibits your ability to work, you'd really not share that too much with people outside your own immediate family. And to do so can result in some kind of social stigma. Okay? So there's the cultural stigma and the social stigma that acts as barriers to that. Of course, language is a big issue too. So many people who are not very acculturated may not necessarily speak English fluently enough to have the same vocabulary, the same use of language to describe what feelings and what emotions they're going through. So that's something that has to be addressed or one has to be sensitive to, both in terms of delivering services, but when one is a provider or a therapist and trying to provide treatment.
Do you feel there are any particular financial barriers?
The number of people in the Asian community that do not have health insurance is much higher than the mainstream population. So access in terms of affordability is another one of those barriers.
Yeah.
Getting back to the language piece, there is, like, say, 100 different Asian languages, so there's not much recovery-minded language, and there's not enough bilingual peer advocates. Because if we had more bilingual peer advocates, that would definitely solve a lot of some of the recovery practices that are used in the facilities sometimes, because they need to trust somebody, and sometimes having a peer advocate there of Asian that's bilingual could probably have a lot of empathy towards another person, and the people in the family tend to look at them as far as, because we're sometimes considered the experts sometimes. We know what's going on with us. We're in tune with what's going on with us. So if we have recovery language in different languages and people able to communicate that would be really well. And linguistic competence is a big thing too in recovery language too. You know, so yeah. Again, the whole effort is to have more Asian American peer advocates. So yeah, we could do that.
I agree. I think that would help in terms of delivery systems greatly, because many folks feel that this is only something that's happening to me or something that's only happening to my family, and especially when there's a tendency not to share that out, then you just sort of isolate yourself, and the problems just get worse and worse. The more role models that are available, the more other people that can share, hey, this is what happened to me, and I've been able to heal, I've been able to recover, I've been able to get back to work and provide for my family. Those are important stories for other people to see and hear about. Jonathan's an exception, as he knows. There's very few Asians that are willing to come into public, kind of share what their experience is, and offer hope and offer a role model for how people can get better.
Plus, when I'm at work, just the ability to disclose in the right way can help so much for another person to recover, another client or another patient. I hate to use the medical model term, but another client there that needs to recover, you know, by having a peer advocate there. I mean, my ability to disclose and relay information will help them in other. Like, say, for example, if I'm talking about psychotic episodes, and I could say, well, I once too was psychotic, but I've recovered from that, and I can use that. And they might not even know what I'm talking about. What do you mean by psychotic? I don't get psychotic. They could be in denial. But if they see that there's a trust issue, how they can relay all that together and say, hey, you know, yeah, maybe that is me sometimes. It can happen, you know.
I'm curious from your experiences, both of you, maybe some general similarities and general differences between mental health specifically in the Asian community, as well as maybe just the population as a whole, or even the American population as a whole. What are some really pronounced differences, and how might they be comparable?
Go ahead.
So when I try to imagine whether it be a member of my family or friends, relatives that have struggled with a mental disorder or emotional disorder, I picture them more first trying to work it out themselves, not really talking to many other people, certainly maybe to their parents, but not going too much beyond that. If they're involved in church or religion, it is permissible, and it's okay to take it that far, because that is understood and that's still within that cultural context. To go outside the family, that would be something very unusual. And so oftentimes that really doesn't ever happen until a young person maybe goes off to college and they learn more about psychology and mental health issues, and then they'll maybe see a college counselor. So for many people, that's the first time that anyone in their family for generations has gone outside of the family to talk about problems or struggles they might be having within themselves or among their family. And that's why school-based and college counseling centers are a very important arena to make sure that there's the cultural competency at that level. Then going on to the next, if it is something that is more severe, there's a tendency to try to eat right or try to exercise, just get more committed to work and work harder, and maybe it'll just go away. And unfortunately, that's when problems just start to escalate and the person becomes more isolated. And that's when we see people that do come in services. It's usually for the emergency room or in the hospital where the problems have gotten so bad that the person has become suicidal, or the symptoms are so out of control they're not able to function anymore and end up having to go into residential treatment, which of course is much more expensive and much harder to turn things around to get back on track. Okay? And not saying that they don't get back, it's just that it's a lot harder once they've gotten so far down the road.
Both of you have provider roles in your own domains. So I'm curious what providers should really consider when treating someone in the Asian community. What are some really key takeaways and key points to keep in mind?
Well, the hope is that if we can deliver cultural competency services, that would be nice. Because I can tell you something that we did recently at our organization where sometimes the providers aren't really cultural competent, but we're kind of set up in areas where we have different wings where we handle our clients. So on my wing, actually, I kind of like am able to talk to the Asians a little bit. And the first thing that we did recently was that we organized a community outing, because the Asian American clients or the Asian clients never get out of the building sometimes because they're so isolated. They isolate too much, and they don't really open to treatment sometimes or recovery. So my job at that time, what I did is organize a dim sum outing right after the Lunar New Year. So that was really great. It just worked so much just to get them out of the building and be able to sit down and have cultural food from their culture. So that was a big step at that point, because in some of the facilities, they don't serve their culture's food.
Oh, wow.
And so that's a big step, yeah. And just to get them out, engaging in the community, back in the community, feeling worthwhile, and being able to share food was nice. So that was a nice thing that we did. Yeah.
When you think about the Asian cultural healing practices, they have to do with exercise, qigong, tai chi, with diet nutrition, so terrible tasting soups, and those are part of how more kind of traditional Asians would think about healing. So the more you can integrate those types of healing practices with what we know in our technology about psychology, the science of psychology, psychiatry, how the brain works, when you integrate those with traditional healing practices, that makes it much more palatable. It's much more accommodating to that person's conceptualization and view of how to heal.
Plus, it's a way to gain trust, because they're so standoffish that they don't trust anybody other than sometimes, and this could hurt them too, trusting their own race or ethnic group. But hopefully, if you gain a little bit of trust, and what I was able to do early on when I was a mental health client back in the early 80s, mid to late 80s, I had to trust the system. I had no choice. It was a faulty system at that point. I was able to recover by trusting and learning the meds and learning all that part of it. But if you, like you said, gain their trust and kind of see that you're not trying to hurt them, you're on the same side as them and have the same goals, and you're really trying to help them a little bit, it's very helpful to them too, if they could feel that out too as well.
When one thinks about trying to provide services to a client or a consumer that might have quite a different worldview of not only what is wrong with me, but how does that play out in the world and the community that I live in. if you can be aware, the terms that use these days is called cultural humility. So if you can be aware that maybe the way I think about the world and maybe the way I view it and the values and perceptions that I have are good and fine for me, but it's not the same, necessarily the same that the other person has. So trying to respect that and so therefore bother to ask the questions to try to get a better understanding of that other person's worldview. Then that said, appreciating the diversity of the Asian community. So the Asian community, which, as I said, always kind of gets lumped into one big statistic, runs from everything from, you know, the president, CEO of Yahoo to a person who just kind of came off the boat and is living in Chinatown and just trying to struggle, not even knowing how to speak English and maybe not being documented and therefore not be able to get a job. And so maybe going through a lot of trauma that they experience on the way over. So that their kind of life experiences can be very different, yet they're all Asian. And so appreciating, you know, not only how that person immigrated to the United States, but also what their level of acculturation is, what their socioeconomic status is, their education, and therefore be able to get a sense of their understanding of how what they believe is wrong with them and how to go about treating that. So you really have to kind of get into, you know, when you get down to the core of it, culturally competent services is just high quality services because, you know, my wife is Latina, but I wouldn't expect that I'm an expert in Latino mental health. And so even when I'm working with a Latino client, I still need to understand where they're coming from, what their worldview is, and even have to go into research and do some literature review because someone coming from Nicaragua is very different from someone coming from Cuba, and so you want to, you know, appreciate the differences of that person's experience. Ultimately, though, you know, a person cannot be an expert in everything, and so having people to consult to, and with Google, there's a lot of things that one can look up and one can learn a lot about people's experiences. At Community Health, I didn't know as much about the Southeast Asian community until I started working there. So I did a lot of research, talked to my staff, talked to people from the Southeast Asian community, and that's part of becoming more culturally competent.
What would you tell a member of the Asian American community who might be struggling with mental health issues?
Well, if they can find like a peer advocacy group to get involved with, like the Pool of Consumer Champions, it's an excellent way to get involved, to go to conferences, educate each other, educate the public, educate professionals, and the whole goal is to do this we do this by connecting with each other and doing peer support and going to conferences, like I said. But the whole goal is to transform the system into a better system, a better mental health system. There's a whole lot of networking that goes on, like I said. There's a whole lot of kind of fun things that they do, and there's also a way to get paid and to get reimbursed for your expenses as far as travel. You get stipends or you get paid, which is really, really well. And that's because we all know the fastest way to probably wellness and recovery is through doing some kind of work or some kind of job. It's going to make us feel worthwhile, and there's committees that they can work on, like the Asian American Committee, or they can get involved with consumer employment for Asian Americans as well, and also just never to give up hope and work on the 5 basic foundations of recovery: hope, education, responsibility, support, advocacy, all of those things.
That getting connected socially and being able to talk with other people, try to understand more what one is going through, and to recognize that this happens to people. It's actually, I mean, statistically it's abnormal because it doesn't happen to everybody all the time, but it's not as uncommon as one might believe. Trying to learn more about what they're going through and kind of try to address these issues of, you know, am I going crazy, or what does this mean? And because most of unfortunately, most of the nomenclature, most of the terms and language used to describe mental disorders in Asian languages are all pretty negative, pretty derogatory. Terms like broken brain or possessed by evil spirits, and so one does not want to admit or think that that's what's happening to them. And so to recognize that there are things that can be explained genetically, can be explained in terms of the neurology, in terms of biochemistry, and in terms of one's thinking, how well they take care of their mental and physical health, are all helpful tips, and those can be done a lot more effectively in a social context, talking with other people and other families who are also going through that.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, are there any resources that you guys would like to share with viewers regarding Asian mental health, and if there might be an Asian consumer out there who's looking for ways to get involved or ways to share their story or get advice, what would you recommend?
Yeah, depending on where the viewing audience happens to be, in Alameda County, there's 2 Asian-focused agencies that serve the Asian community. There's CHA, Community Health for Asian Americans, and Asian Community Mental Health. They're 2 of the main providers of mental health treatment. We also recognize, though, that most people who will receive services within the Asian community usually will not be going to an Asian-focused agency. And so that's why it's important for the sort of mainstream agencies to learn more about the unique perspectives and skills that it takes to work with an Asian client. And CHA, ACMHS are 2 organizations, at least, that are interested in trying to consult and help other agencies lift their quality.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for being here today. It's very much appreciated, Jonathan and David. And thank you all for watching Mental Health Matters. We'll see you next time.